40 years ago, some of the biggest names in pop recorded the song Do They Know It's Christmas? The song raised millions of dollars for Ethiopia, and now a new version of the song dropped. Today on the show, we unpack the controversial legacy of this song. I'm Ali Hassan, sitting in for Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion, and I think it's only appropriate that we start today right here. That is Do They Know It's Christmas, the all-star charity single for Ethiopian famine relief, released in December of 1984. You got George Michael in there, Bono, Sting, Phil Collins, Duran Duran, and the man who orchestrated it all, Bob Geldof. That song raised a ton of money. It became an instant holiday season classic, and it inspired pop stars on this side of the Atlantic to join the cause with We Are the World and Tears Are Not Enough. But despite the song's good intentions, it also generated a lot of criticism over the years for perpetuating stereotypes about African people. And now there's a new 40th anniversary version of the song that just dropped today, and it too is generating a fresh wave of negative attention. The group chat is here to talk about it. Nels Abbey, Maura Johnston, welcome.
Hello.
Maura,
thank you.
How are you? So, Maura, 1984, goes without saying for many of us, huge year for pop music. You have Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, Madonna, Like a Virgin, Prince, Purple Rain. And then at the end of that year, the biggest names in British pop come together under the name Band-Aid, and they gave us this Do They Know It's Christmas? Tell me about the impact this song had when it came out, why it became as popular as it did.
Sure. I mean, as you said, this was the first sort of mega charity single with a lot of big names, as Quincy Jones would put it in the We Are the World session that came later, checking their egos at the door for what they thought was a good cause. And, in the years since, it's become a staple of pop radio on Christmas. So many radio stations here in the States are flipping to all Christmas formats earlier and earlier. This year, the first ones went all Christmas October 1st. So, that requires a lot of programming. And I mean, in 1984, as you said, it was a big year for pop, and radio had a big overhaul during that time too, with the New York station C100 launching in 1983 and other stations sort of following in its wake. And their Christmas programming was still very nostalgia driven. It was a lot of old songs, the Spectre Christmas album, Burl Ives, etc. So having this new piece of pop music that could be played and sound relatively current and have people who were known, it not only did it sound current, it had the altruistic sort of overtones to it. And eventually it also laid the groundwork for Live Aid, which was the cross-continental concert that happened in London and Philadelphia. And that was, I think, the beginning of pop music kind of growing closer and having this more sort of globalized outlook.
Right. And Nels, I want to turn to you on this, and thanks for joining us. So you're in Lagos, Nigeria right now. We don't have you.
Lagos, Nigeria.
Yeah, you're in Lagos. We don't have you on camera because you're on the move, but thank you for joining us at a strange time for this. You wrote something very interesting in The Guardian, so I'm interested to hear your perspective. You're somebody who's both British and Nigerian. Tell me about your personal relationship with the song and maybe even how it's changed over the years.
Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. And I think you should consider yourself quite lucky that you don't have me on camera, because I'm a bit worse for wear at the moment due to the beautiful heat that I find myself under. I'll say this, so for me, I was a child that was born into this, what I now call the Live Aid imagery. That was even though I had Nigerian parents, that was my perception of Africa. That's as they put it there, that nothing grows, there's nothing but misery or so, to the point when the mere suggestion when I was a child that we might go on holiday to Nigeria was to me absolutely petrifying. Let alone absolutely petrifying. That was me who came from a household that was pretty much African. So it was, but it was quite a concept. So that was the initial thing for me. So in terms of inheriting that imagery of Africa,
Nels, we're having trouble hearing you there. There's some, I think because you're on the road, we're having trouble hearing you there and getting some feedback. If we can get you back, I do want to discuss much more of that in your relationship to this song and really what it did for your identity in Africa. But Maura, let me ask you, this song was also a big part of your childhood. And you didn't have to be, as we were talking to Nels, you didn't have to be anywhere in particular in the world as long as you were alive during that time. It did shape your childhood. What point did you start to clue in that maybe there were some problematic aspects with this song?
I think, like Nels spoke to, the idea of sort of the abstractness of this, what was being sung about. And obviously over the years, we've been able to sort of see firsthand accounts, and more sort of people speaking for themselves as opposed to to put it, in a blunt way, the white savior kind of swooping in and having this saving the day perspective. And, obviously I think that lyrics like it, Bono's famous "Tonight, Thank God It's Them Instead of You," still sort of, those caused me to cringe, probably much earlier on than other things. And I think, also you have, increased scrutiny over charitable nonprofits in general and like these sort of big gestures. And it's like, well, where does the money go? Like, just, why don't you just, be humble and give the money or give your time, in a way that is more tangible than than these sort of big gestures that sort of, bring together like, hey, all the celebrities are in one room and singing, that kind of thing.
Right. Do we have Nels back, by the way? I don't know if we have Nels back. I'll tell you that my background is a political science degree focusing on what was called the developing world, or even back then it was called the third world. So books like, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa was like cocaine to me. So this song, like you, Maura, I was in a very cringy space, and it was because who Bono was to me when Sunday Bloody Sunday came out and who he is today, I felt like those lyrics in that song were so. I was like, how did Bono? Did somebody force Bono at gunpoint to sing these lyrics?
Well, I think he thought it was more of like I think he thought it was sort of more like a there but for the grace of God kind of thing, but it came out very, very poorly.
Absolutely. And I will point our listeners and our viewers to Nels' article in The Guardian, which is pretty terrific, short but terrific article talking about this song and its legacy. And one part of what he talks about is the timing of when this came out, 1984, which was exactly 100 years after we had this Berlin conference in 1884, where the imperial powers were sort of divvying up Africa to colonize, and so 100 years later, it should have been, as far as Africans were concerned. And I hate putting words in his mouth, but it was a time to really reflect on what those 100 years have been. But colonizers do like to distract. I think we can all admit that. And so that was a great moment for distraction. And then 10 years later, right, there have been more versions of this song that have come out 10 years after, 20, and now, of course, 40 years later, when it is the 100.
There was also the 5-year.
Oh, I didn't know about the 5-year
version that's been kind of written out of history with like Kylie Minogue, and Lisa Stansfield, but that does not appear on this new one that came out today.
So I knew about 1989, the 20th anniversary, and then the 30th anniversary in 2014, and then today we have this. So let's play a bit of this. That is the brand new 40th anniversary version. Some might say not necessary version of Do They Know It's Christmas just dropped today. It features vocals from all the previous versions mashed together, so no new artists on it. So now you have George Michael and Boy George singing alongside people who were in later renditions like Robbie Williams, Sinead O'Connor, Sam Smith, One Direction. You also have, of note, Ed Sheeran, who appeared in 2014 on that recording, who's not very happy about being included in this new version. Maura, can you talk to us a little bit about that, about what's got Ed Sheeran voicing his concerns?
Absolutely. Earlier this month, he reposted a post by the Ghanaian English singer Fuse ODG, who had posted on Instagram that initiatives like this, quote, fuel pity rather than partnership, discouraging meaningful engagement. And so Sheeran reposted that and said, my approval wasn't sought on this new Band-Aid 40 release, and had I had the choice, I would have respectfully declined the use of my vocals. A decade on, and my understanding of the narrative associated with this has changed, which I think has happened with a lot of people since the 1984 release, certainly, and even since the 2014 release.
Right, and getting back to this song itself, what do you make of the move to revive the song in this way?
I mean, I listened to it this morning, and it felt like looking at a science experiment. You know what it felt like? I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Scrooged?
I have.
Like, it felt like this sort of like really kind of gaudy retelling of A Christmas Carol with the solid gold dancers, just like this kind of spectacle of celebrity. I know that Trevor Horn, who produced it, used technology similar to how Now and Then by the Beatles, which came out last year and is up for a Grammy, was put together with machine learning. But, aside from the sound, like, I don't really want to hear George Michael posthumously duetting with Harry Styles. Sinead O'Connor, I feel like she would have been someone, if she were still alive, she probably would have objected very eloquently to this. I know that people love round numbers and it's the 40th anniversary, but it just feels so ghoulish, especially with like Liam Payne, who recently passed away, being involved, and like, David Bowie and all of these people who, recorded something in a very different time. Even 2014 was a very different time for understanding of these sorts of issues.
Yeah, I'm going to end on one question to you, a more pointed question, Maura. But before I do that, I also, Bob Geldof is the brains behind this. We should mention this. He has heard all the criticisms. He's clearly not having any of it. His statement recently on a website called The Conversation was, it's a pop song for F's sake. There is endemic hunger due to the unforgiving soil conditions. Water is scarce, save for a scattering of unreliable wells. Rain is increasingly unreliable. Climate change affects the poorest first and worst. These are not colonial tropes. They are empirical facts. With all that in mind and your own experience, my last question is, do they know it's Christmas? Does it deserve a place in the holiday music canon?
I think it deserves a place in the kind of like, we recognize this, but maybe we don't need to play it anymore canon. And I feel like, obviously, I mean, look, I was 9 when that song came out. The bells, like they're that sort of like very steady beat, they've imprinted on me very profoundly. But I also feel like you could probably make a playlist of, artists who are involved in this, who have their own holiday songs. I mean, between the rush of holiday singles, Ed Sheeran has another holiday single coming out next week. Certainly there's Last Christmas and many other tracks from the Very Special Christmas. And like, if you make a playlist and then like, do the sort of like direct aid as opposed to the Band-Aid being the middleman of, well, we'll get the money. And who knows? I mean, this new version ends with David Bowie saying, please buy the song. But is there a way to buy the song? I mean, I got directed to the Spotify, and that's what are they going to get, like a quarter of a penny from my one stream this morning? So I mean, it's just I think that it deserves like recognition, but maybe not airplay in 2024.
Got it. All right, thank you so much for joining us, Maura.
Thank you.
Maura Johnston is a freelance music journalist based in Boston. And we also heard from Nels Abbey at the top of the conversation. We lost Nels. We weren't able to hear him, but he's an author and broadcaster in Lagos. And I encourage you to go to the Guardian website and read his piece on this song based on his own personal experiences. I'm Ali Hassan, sitting in for Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion, and the film Rust had its world premiere at a festival in Poland last week. You might remember the conversations around Rust. It stars Alec Baldwin, and in the making of this film, he fired a prop gun that turned out to have a live bullet. It has been 3 years since cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was accidentally shot and killed on the film set in New Mexico. The film's armorer, who was responsible for the gun, was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and is currently serving an 18-month prison sentence. Alec Baldwin was also charged with involuntary manslaughter, but a judge dismissed the case back in July, saying that prosecutors and police withheld evidence. Nick Newman was at the premiere screening of Rust. He's here to talk about what it feels like to watch a movie that has so much tragedy associated with it. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Ali. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. What a unique experience to be part of, and such an incredibly loaded subject in the end. You know, some people have questioned whether Rust should have been completed. And then after it was done, should it have been screened? And then, once it's screened, how the tragedy should be addressed there. So, I mean, who better to talk to you than you, Nick? You were in the room. Can you tell us about this screening that you went to at Camera Image Film Festival in Poland?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Maybe it's worth contextualizing that Camera Image is a festival that for 30 plus years has celebrated cinematographers and their craft. It's one of the very few festivals that does as much. And it's a wonderful place to celebrate both movies and this dual artistic technician craft that's very under the radar. Cinematography isn't necessarily that sexy a thing to celebrate at larger festivals like Cannes or Venice or Berlin. But the thing about Camera Image is that it unfortunately gets the most English language coverage when something controversial happens. So last year, Adam Driver got into a bit of a verbal spat with a screening attendee. This year, the festival's director wrote an op-ed criticizing diversity initiatives, which led to these headlines in places like Deadline and Variety, where Steve McQueen pulled out of appearing at the festival. Coralie Fargier, who made The Substance, pulled the film entirely. What's odd is that prior to this, the biggest controversy of the year was Rust. And now the op-ed from the director has overshadowed it. It's almost a PR version of robbing Peter to pay Paul. But it makes sense on paper that they would be the festival to celebrate this of all films. And during the screening, it was alleged that Hutchins had wanted Rust to screen there in the first place. At the screening, they had the director, Joel Souza, who was also injured in the shooting incident. They had Bianca Klein, the DP who had replaced Hutchins. They also had Rachel Mason, a friend of Halyna Hutchins, who is currently making a documentary about her. But crucially, Alec Baldwin was not invited. And not only was he not invited, his name was not mentioned once in the many minutes spent on introductions and post-film discussions. So you think you've experienced an elephant in the room. It was very odd. I think it's also worth noting, before we get to your next question, that Hutchins' family have a very seemingly conflicted feeling about this. The sense I get is that they're disturbed by the initiative to sell the film and thus make a profit off of it. And they were not present at the screening. And some headlines were saying that her mother was skipping the screening, but she's actually stranded in Ukraine. And having missed many film screenings for many reasons, I would consider that a pretty good one.
Your article in Vulture goes into great detail, very articulately, about the experience. I wonder if you can share that, about what it felt like to be in the room to watch this film.
Yeah, really bad vibes, I gotta say. We were queuing up outside in the Torun multiplex, and there were photographers who were trying to capture the atmosphere of the unwashed masses in their soft shells and backpacks entering the multiplex theater. And you get in, Souza is talking to the festival director while a bunch of photographers are situated around them, and they're trying to carry on this conversation, which no human being could carry on normally, of course. People didn't want to talk to me about the piece. People usually don't want to talk to me, but you can really feel the energy when you're a reporter who is there to cover this tragic film. And then the festival directors gave their introduction, which I would describe as very polemicized, in the sense that they were front-loading this with, there's been a lot of talk about this screening, but we think you'll find that we made the right decision. And they asked that we not think about the tragedy as we watch the movie, which I defy somebody to watch the movie knowing about the tragedy and not think about this film where Alec Baldwin is shooting a lot of people. And he's asked at one point, how many men have you killed? And he says, I have lost count. Those sorts of things made the whole experience strange. I should also note that Mason she gave an introduction that I thought was very impassioned and was very well said about how much she loved her friend, how tragic her death is, how the film was completed on behalf of her by the crew members because they loved her so much. And then she read a statement from Helena's mother, which was expressing support for the screening. And then as she finished it, she said, by the way, this is a real statement. And if anybody wants to see it, they can come to me and I'll show it to them. And so it's this thing where it's like a mourning of her, it's a celebration of her work, but it's also treated almost as courtroom evidence. Evidence for the defense or for the prosecution maybe is a little bit up to you, but nothing could really settle in the room. Nothing could just be. Yeah. There's all people staking their claim, adding their side of the story, maybe getting ahead of a story that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a couple of minutes. I definitely want to ask you about this. Yeah. There was a panel discussion involving director Joel Souza, who you mentioned, who I don't know if I even mentioned this. He was also shot.
Yeah.
He was injured in the accident that killed Halyna Hutchins. And that panel also involved cinematographer Bianca Klein, who completed the film.
Correct.
Right? So what did they have to say?
All the roads led back to Hutchins. No matter what the question was, the answer would go back to her, which it's not my place to really have any value judgment on that. I think if I were talking about this film and I were in their position, I'd do the same. Where it got most interesting was the moderator asked what I would consider a fair question, which is what percentage of the film was her? What percentage of the film is you? And Klein shot back, I can answer, it's a terrible question. And you could see the moderator in real time scrambling and calling an audible to fix the situation. And he kind of retconned his question to say, no, I was really asking how much visual influence did she have? Which is not what he was asking, but he was in a tough situation. I think it's worth noting that I saw Klein and the moderator right after sort of commiserating, and I could kind of hear her making what sounded like an apology. I think it was a very charged event. It was very difficult for the people there to keep a composure.
Yeah. One last question to you. Not an easy question either, but at the moment, Rust is not scheduled to screen at any other festivals, and it does not have a release date. I'm wondering, twofold. Do you think it will be released at some point? And if so, is it a film still worth watching?
I've heard through the grapevine that there's a distribution deal coming. Granted, that was last week. It's the beginning of the new week. Thanksgiving is coming. People don't want to work this week, but there very well could be an announcement today because it's about 10:30 EST currently. So I think it will come out, or I think it at least will appear at some point. Now, as for whether or not it's worth seeing, there's a lot of ways to approach that idea. I think if you like Westerns with some strong imagery, which the movie boasts, and a movie star giving a interesting, albeit haunted performance because of what happened while they were shooting it. And that, I think the film is not bad, which is something that's going to get lost in this, which whether that's fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know. If you have morbid curiosity about it, it would be fulfilled. I would suggest spending time with your loved ones rather than fulfilling that morbid curiosity by watching the movie. A real movie does peek through while you're watching Rust. It's just that it is so ensconced in tragedy and context. So it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I knew that going in. But thank you for your time, Nick. Appreciate it.
Really my pleasure. Thank you.
Nick Newman is the managing editor for the Film Stage. He wrote a great article in Vulture about his time at Camera Image Festival, screening that film. That is it for the podcast today. If you're listening to this on the podcast, don't forget to give us a follow. That would really help us out. Also, check us out on YouTube and Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Ali Hassan, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. Have a good day.